Oscar Walker's fingers drummed nervously against his pocket for the 100th time that evening, feeling the outline of the small velvet box hidden within. The ocean breeze carried the salt-tinged air through the open windows of the beachside restaurant, and the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. He watched as his wife, Melody, took another sip of her wine, her face glowing in the warm light of the candle between them. The last 6 months had been a careful dance of budget spreadsheets and extra shifts. Every Friday and Saturday night, while his friends watched movies or went to parties, Oscar had donned the blue uniform of Henderson Security Services, patrolling empty office buildings until dawn. The exhaustion had been worth it, though. Worth it for this moment. Worth it for the way Melody's eyes had lit up when they'd checked into the modest but charming Sandpiper in that afternoon. "You didn't have to do all this," Melody said, gesturing at the half-empty plates of seafood before them. "It must have cost a fortune." Oscar reached across the table and squeezed her hand. 15 years deserves something special, don't you think? The waiter appeared with their dessert, a slice of tiramisu to share. Oscar noticed how Melody's wedding ring caught the candlelight as she picked up her fork. 15 years of memories flooded his mind. Their courthouse wedding when they were barely out of college, the birth of their daughters, countless Sunday barbecues with Luke manning the grill while Oscar tried to keep the girls from tracking mud through the house. "Remember our first anniversary?" Oscar asked, smiling at the memory. "When I tried to cook that fancy French recipe and nearly burned down our apartment?" Melody's laugh seemed slightly forced. "And Luke came over with pizzas to save the day. He's always been there for us, hasn't he?" Oscar said, not noticing how Melody's fingers tightened around her fork. Best friend anyone could ask for. Back in their hotel room, Oscar waited until Melody emerged from the bathroom in her favorite silk pajamas, another anniversary splurge he'd been saving for. The velvet box felt heavy in his hands as he approached her. "I have one more surprise," he said, holding out the box. Melody's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. The silver bracelet caught the warm light from the bedside lamp, its delicate chain supporting small, intricately designed charms. "It's the one you've been looking at in Morris Jewelers," Oscar explained, his voice soft with anticipation. "I saw how your eyes lit up every time we walked past. Each charm represents a year of our marriage. See? A tiny house for our first home, baby booties for the girls, a Christmas tree for all our holidays together." Melody's eyes filled with tears. Oscar's heart swelled, thinking they were tears of joy, not noticing the way her shoulders had tensed or how she hadn't actually said anything yet. "Here, let me put it on you," he offered, taking the bracelet from the box. The clasp gave him some trouble. His fingers were better suited for grading papers and working with historical maps than dealing with such delicate jewelry. But finally, it settled around her wrist. They got ready for bed in comfortable silence, or what Oscar thought was comfortable silence. He didn't notice how Melody kept touching her wedding ring, twisting it around and around her finger as she stared at herself in the bathroom mirror. He was too busy thinking about how perfect the evening had been, how he'd managed to give her the anniversary she deserved despite their tight budget. The sheets were crisp and cool as they settled into bed. Oscar reached over to turn off the lamp, but Melody's voice stopped him. "Wait," she said, and something in her tone made his hand freeze halfway to the switch. "Oscar, I need to tell you something." He turned to face her, noting how she sat up straight against the headboard, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The new bracelet caught the light, sending tiny reflections dancing across the wall. "What is it, honey?" he asked, still riding the high of what he thought had been a perfect evening. Melody took a deep breath, and in the warm glow of the bedside lamp, Oscar saw something shift in her expression. Her fingers moved from the bracelet to her wedding ring, twisting it nervously. "Luke and I have fallen in love," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "And we've been seeing each other for years." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and impossible. Oscar's mind refused to process them at first, as if they were spoken in a language he didn't understand. He stared at her, waiting for the punchline of what must be a terrible joke. But Melody wasn't laughing. She was still talking, her words coming faster now, like a dam breaking. "We think it's time to open our marriage. We thought maybe we could all live together, share everything." Oscar's world tilted on its axis. The room seemed to spin around him, the walls closing in. His eyes fixed on the silver bracelet around her wrist. Each charm suddenly a marker not of their happy memories, but of years of deception. The tiny house charm caught the light, mocking him with its representation of the home they'd built together. The home she'd apparently been sharing with his best friend all along. The sound of waves crashing against the beach outside their window became a roar in his ears. Each crash seemed to bring another realization. Luke helping Melody with her car troubles, the late-night texts she'd shield from his view, the way they'd both suddenly taken up hiking last summer. All those moments he'd dismissed as ordinary. Everyday occurrences now revealed themselves as links in a chain of betrayal that stretched back years. He could see them now, all those Sunday barbecues, in a new light. While he'd been inside helping Amy with her homework or cleaning up after Jennifer's art projects, had Luke and Melody been exchanging knowing glances over the grill? Had they been laughing at him, the oblivious husband too trusting to see what was right in front of him? The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of the waves and the quiet hum of the hotel air conditioning. Melody reached out to touch his arm, but he flinched away as if her touch burned. "Oscar, please say something," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "We can make this work. Luke and I have talked about it so much. We could be happy together, all of us." The irony of her words, "we've talked about it so much," hit him like a physical blow. While he'd been working extra shifts as a night security guard, counting every penny to buy her that bracelet, she and Luke had been planning their future together, a future that reduced Oscar to a convenient third wheel in his own marriage. The hotel room that had felt cozy and romantic just hours ago now seemed to be suffocating him. Oscar's movements were mechanical as he swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood up. His phone sat on the nightstand, its screen reflecting the warm light of the lamp. He grabbed it with trembling hands, nearly dropping it as he tried to unlock the screen. He moved through the room like a sleepwalker, gathering his wallet and car keys. His overnight bag sat in the corner, still mostly packed. They'd only been at the hotel for a few hours. Hours that had transformed from some of the happiest in recent memory to this nightmare. As he moved, memories crashed over him like waves, each one revealing new layers of deception. That book club Melody had joined 2 years ago, the one that always seemed to meet on nights when Luke was free to give her a ride. The way Luke had started showing up at the house more often, claiming he was just in the neighborhood and thought he'd stop by. He remembered Luke's enthusiasm when Oscar had mentioned wanting to build a tree house for the girls. "I'll help you with that, buddy," Luke had said, clapping him on the shoulder. They'd spent weekends working on it together, Luke bringing over his tools and expertise while Oscar followed his instructions. Had Luke been laughing at him then, planning his next rendezvous with Melody while they hammered nails and sawed boards together? The texts, God, the texts. How many times had he noticed Melody quickly turning her phone away when he walked into the room? She'd always said she was just catching up with friends or checking work emails. He'd never questioned it, never wanted to be the kind of husband who snooped or doubted. Trust, he'd always believed, was the foundation of their marriage. "Oscar, please," Melody's voice broke through his thoughts. She stood between him and the door now, her silk pajamas catching the light, the silver bracelet still gleaming on her wrist. "We could talk about this. Luke and we've thought it all through. There are ways to make this work. If you'll just listen." The fact that she was still wearing his anniversary gift, still trying to sell him on this idea of sharing their marriage with Luke, made bile rise in his throat. Without a word, he stepped around her and walked out the door. The hallway carpet muffled his footsteps as he made his way to the elevator, leaving behind the sound of Melody calling his name. The night air hit him like a slap when he stepped outside. The same ocean breeze that had seemed so romantic earlier now felt cold and harsh against his face. His car sat in the hotel parking lot, the old Honda that Luke had been servicing for years. How many of those repairs had been necessary? How many had been excuses for Luke and Melody to meet? His phone buzzed in his pocket, Dora responding to his text. "Of course. I'm home. Are you okay?" He couldn't bring himself to answer that question yet. Instead, he got into his car and started the engine. The familiar rumble, maintained so carefully by his betrayer, filled the silence. As he pulled out of the parking lot, he caught a glimpse of Melody standing on their hotel room balcony, watching him leave. The sight of her diminishing figure in his rearview mirror felt like watching 15 years of his life fade away into darkness. Dora Freeman's apartment building loomed ahead, a modest three-story complex on the outskirts of town. Oscar sat in his car for several minutes after parking, trying to compose himself enough to face his sister. The dashboard clock showed 11:42 p.m., not the way he'd expected to end his anniversary celebration. The security light flickered as he climbed the outdoor stairs to Dora's second-floor apartment. Each step felt like lifting lead weights. When he reached her door, he didn't even need to knock. It swung open immediately, revealing his sister's worried face. "Oscar." Dora's voice was soft with concern. She wore flannel pajama pants and an old college sweatshirt, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. One look at her brother's face told her everything she needed to know. "Come in, come in." The apartment was small but cozy, cluttered with books and papers from Dora's graduate studies in psychology. She cleared a stack of journals from the couch, making space for Oscar to sit. The familiar smell of her apartment, a mix of coffee, old books, and the lavender candle she loved, provided a small comfort. "I'll make some tea," she said, moving toward the kitchen. Or do you need something stronger?" Oscar's composure finally broke. The tears he'd been holding back since leaving the hotel burst forth, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Dora abandoned the idea of tea and rushed to sit beside him, pulling her big brother into a tight hug. "Melody and Luke," he managed to choke out between sobs. They've been, shoo," Dora soothed, rubbing circles on his back like their mother used to do when they were kids. "Take your time." Through his tears, Oscar told her everything. The perfect anniversary dinner, the bracelet he'd saved for months to buy, Melody's devastating confession. As he spoke, he pulled out his phone and showed Dora the banking app, the careful tracking of his security guard wages, the savings account he'd labeled M Surprise, where he'd been squirreling away money for her teaching degree. "I was going to tell her tomorrow," he said, his voice hollow, "about the summer classes. I'd worked it all out with the community college. She always talked about wanting to teach, about how she'd given up on her degree when we had Amy." Dora's expression shifted, a shadow passing over her face. She got up and retrieved her laptop from the dining table, settling back beside him on the couch. "There's something else you should know," she said hesitantly. "I didn't want to be the one to tell you this, but..." She opened her laptop and navigated to Facebook, scrolling through various posts from their mutual friends. Oscar's breath caught in his throat as he saw the evidence laid out before him. Photos of Luke and Melody at restaurants he'd never been to, at parties he hadn't attended. Comments from their friends that now seemed obvious in their implications. "You two look so happy together. And what a cute couple." "They've been barely hiding it," Dora explained gently. "Everyone knew except you." Oscar stared at the screen, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. There was a photo from just last month, Melody and Luke at a concert, his arm around her waist, both of them beaming at the camera. The caption read, "Great night with this amazing woman. #blessed." "The concert," Oscar whispered. "She told me she was going with her book club friends. I even thanked Luke for giving her a ride because I had to work late at school that night." Dora scrolled further, revealing more photos, more comments, more evidence of the double life his wife and best friend had been leading. There they were at a wine-tasting event, at a hiking trail Oscar had never visited, at a New Year's Eve party he'd missed because of his security guard shift. "Look at the dates," Dora said quietly. "Some of these go back years." Oscar's eyes fixed on a particular photo from 2 summers ago. It showed Luke and Melody at the beach, the same beach where he'd just taken her for their anniversary. They were sharing an ice cream cone, looking at each other with unmistakable affection. The comments below were filled with heart emojis and knowing winks. "I don't understand," he said, his voice breaking. "How could everyone know? Why didn't anyone tell me?" Dora closed the laptop, unable to watch her brother's heart break any further. I think people assumed you knew, that it was some kind of arrangement you'd all agreed to. You know how close you and Luke have always been. And lately, they haven't exactly been subtle." Oscar stood up abruptly, pacing the small living room. An arrangement? They've been laughing at me, Dora. All those extra shifts I worked, all the money I saved. I was working nights as a security guard while Luke was taking my wife to concerts and wine tastings. The reality of his situation hit him full force. Not only had his wife and best friend betrayed him, but they'd done it so openly that it had become common knowledge. While he'd been planning anniversary surprises and saving for her education, they'd been flaunting their relationship on social media, assuming he was too blind or too stupid to notice. "I need to lie down," he muttered, suddenly feeling dizzy. I can't process this right now." Dora immediately jumped up. "Of course. I'll get the spare room ready. You can stay as long as you need." As she bustled around preparing the guest room, Oscar sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. His phone buzzed repeatedly, messages from Melody, probably still trying to sell him on their idea of a three-way relationship. He turned the phone off without reading them. The silver bracelet he'd been so proud to give her just hours ago now felt like a monument to his own naivety. Each charm, representing a year of their marriage, also represented a year of deception. 15 years of memories, tarnished in a single evening. "You should try to get some sleep," Doris said softly, returning to the living room. She had made up the spare bed with fresh sheets and left a clean towel on the dresser. "We can figure out next steps in the morning." Oscar nodded numbly, but sleep felt impossible. As he lay in Dora's spare room, his mind kept replaying every interaction with Luke over the past few years. The friendly claps on the shoulder, the offers to help with home repairs, the concerned questions about whether Oscar was working too hard. Had it all been an act? A way to assuage Luke's guilt while he pursued a relationship with Oscar's wife? He thought about his daughters, Amy and Jennifer, and how they would react to this news. How do you tell your children that their Uncle Luke, the man who helped build their treehouse and taught them how to change a tire, had been secretly involved with their mother? How do you explain to them that their family home, the only home they'd ever known, might now become some sort of bizarre polyamorous experiment? The digital clock on the nightstand ticked past midnight, then 1, then 2. Outside, the occasional car passed by. Oscar's phone remained off, charging on the dresser. He couldn't bear to read whatever messages Melody might be sending, couldn't stomach the thought of Luke possibly trying to reach out as well. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, exhaustion finally overcame his churning thoughts. As he drifted into an uneasy sleep, his last conscious thought was of the security guard uniform hanging in his closet at home. The uniform he'd worn for countless extra shifts, saving money for a woman who'd been planning to reshape their marriage without his consent. In his dreams, he kept returning to that hotel room, to the moment when everything changed. But in the dreams, he said all the things he wished he'd said in reality. He demanded answers, expressed his anger, defended his dignity. In reality, he had simply walked away, too shocked and hurt to form words. Perhaps that silence, that inability to even engage with their proposal, had been its own kind of dignity. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tomorrow, he would have to start facing the practical implications of this betrayal. But for now, in his sister's spare room, Oscar Walker, dedicated teacher, loving father, betrayed husband, finally fell into a troubled sleep, while across town, in a beachside hotel room, the silver bracelet he'd sacrificed so much to buy lay abandoned on a bedside table. Across the breakfast table where Oscar sat staring into a cold cup of coffee. He hadn't slept more than an hour or two, and his phone screen showed 17 missed calls from Melody and 5 from Luke. The messages he couldn't bring himself to read numbered in the dozens. "You need to go home eventually," Doris said gently, setting a plate of untouched toast aside. "At least to get some clothes and talk to the girls." Oscar nodded numbly. His daughters would be wondering where their parents were. The anniversary weekend was supposed to last until Sunday evening, but here he was at his sister's apartment on Saturday morning, his world shattered into unrecognizable pieces. The drive home felt surreal. Each familiar landmark seemed to mock him with memories. The auto shop where Luke had serviced his car countless times, the bank where Melody worked as a teller, the high school where he taught history. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as he turned onto his street. A sharp intake of breath. Luke's red pickup truck sat in his driveway, next to Melody's silver Civic. They were waiting for him. Of course they were waiting for him. The house key felt foreign in his hand as he unlocked the front door. The sound of voices drifted from the kitchen, quiet, serious tones that cut off abruptly when he stepped inside. The hardwood floors creaked beneath his feet as he moved through the living room, past family photos that now felt like exhibits in a museum of lies. Oscar stopped dead in the kitchen doorway. Luke and Melody sat at his kitchen table, with a laptop open between them and several printed documents spread across the surface. A PowerPoint presentation glowed on the screen, its title slide reading, "Building Our Future Together, a Proposal for Ethical Non-Monogamy." Oscar. Luke stood up, his face a mixture of concern and determination. He looked exactly the same as he had at their last barbecue 2 weeks ago, when he'd helped Oscar clean the grill and talked about planning a fishing trip. "Thank you for coming home. We need to talk about this rationally." Melody's hands were clasped tightly around a coffee mug, the one Oscar had bought her last Christmas, with "World's Best Mom" printed on the side. "Please just sit down and listen. We put a lot of thought into this." Oscar remained standing in the doorway, his voice barely above a whisper. "Where are the girls?" "At my mother's," Melody replied quickly. We thought it would be better to have this conversation privately." Luke cleared his throat and gestured to the laptop. "We've prepared a presentation. It explains everything, how this could work, the benefits for everyone involved. There's research showing that polyamorous households can be just as stable as traditional ones, sometimes even more so." Oscar's eyes moved from the laptop to the papers scattered across the table. Financial documents caught his attention, mortgage statements, bank records. His stomach churned as he picked up one of the papers. "What is this?" he asked, though the letterhead from First Regional Bank made it clear enough. Melody shifted in her chair. "Luke's business has been doing really well. He can help with the mortgage. We thought, with 3 incomes, we could actually upgrade some things around the house. Maybe finally finish the basement renovation you've been talking about. We can make this work," Luke added, clicking to the next slide, which showed a proposed schedule, detailed blocks of time labeled family dinner, Oscar and kids, Melody and Luke date night, Oscar and Melody time. "Look, we've mapped everything out. Equal time, equal respect. The kids would have 3 adults looking out for them instead of just 2. Oscar's hands trembled as he continued scanning the mortgage documents. Something wasn't right. His signature appeared on forms he'd never seen before, dates from weeks ago when he'd been nowhere near a bank. "These forms," he said, his voice growing stronger with dawning understanding. "I never signed these." The kitchen fell silent. Melody's fingers tightened around her coffee mug. Luke's confident posture faltered slightly. "We knew you might need time to adjust to the idea," Melody said carefully. "But the refinancing opportunity was time-sensitive. With my position at the bank, I was able to expedite things." "You forged my signature?" The words came out in a horrified whisper. "It's not like that," Luke jumped in. "We're all going to be living here together. The money's going to benefit everyone. My business is solid. I can cover the increased payments easily." Oscar's world tilted for the second time in less than 24 hours. Not only had they been carrying on behind his back for years, but they'd actually started making financial decisions about his house, forging his signature, planning to take on debt in his name. "Get out," he said quietly. "Oscar, please." Melody stood up. "Just look at the rest of the presentation. We've thought of everything. We can make this work. Get out." The words exploded from him, echoing off the kitchen walls. "Both of you, get out of my house. And take your PowerPoint presentation about stealing my home with you." Luke raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Come on, buddy, you're not thinking clearly. We're trying to be honest with you now, trying to build something better for everyone." "Honest?" Oscar laughed, a harsh sound that held no humor. "You want to talk about honesty while you're sitting there with forged mortgage documents? While you're planning to take my home right out from under me? It's our home," Melody insisted, tears welling in her eyes. "We're trying to make it better, make it work for everyone. The girls would understand eventually. They love Luke. He's been like a second father to them already." That was the wrong thing to say. Oscar's vision went red around the edges. "Luke is their uncle, not their father. I'm their father. I'm the one who's been working 2 jobs to give them everything they need. I'm the one who's been here every day, not sneaking around behind everyone's backs." He grabbed the mortgage documents from the table, crumpling them in his fist. I want both of you out of this house right now. And Melody, you can expect to hear from a lawyer. Forgery is a crime, even for bank tellers. The color drained from Melody's face. You wouldn't what? Report a crime? Tell the truth? That seems to be something you both have trouble with. Oscar turned to Luke, years of friendship turning to ash in his mouth. Take your truck and your PowerPoint and your plans for my house, and get out. Now! Luke stood his ground for a moment, looking like he might argue further, but something in Oscar's expression made him think better of it. He closed the laptop and gathered the remaining papers. Come on, Mel, he said softly. We'll try again when he's calmer. When he can see this is best for everyone. Oscar watched them leave, Luke's arm around Melody's shoulders as they walked to his truck. The same arm that had hugged Oscar at countless birthdays and barbecues. The same shoulders that had helped carry furniture when they'd first moved into this house. When their vehicles had disappeared down the street, Oscar sank into a kitchen chair, the crumpled mortgage documents still clutched in his hand. He pulled out his phone with shaking fingers and did something he never thought he'd have to do. He searched for divorce lawyers in his area. The weeks that followed seemed to blur together in a haze of legal consultations, sleepless nights, and impossible decisions. Oscar's modest teacher's salary stretched thin across 2 households after he moved into a cramped studio apartment, leaving the house to Melody and the girls. His lawyer advised against leaving, but Oscar couldn't bear to stay under the same roof with the woman who had betrayed him so completely. The studio apartment felt more like a cell than a home. A twin bed occupied one corner, a small desk another, and a kitchenette that barely deserved the name took up one wall. The bathroom was so small he had to step sideways around the toilet to reach the shower. But it was all he could afford after factoring in child support and his mounting legal fees. His students noticed the change in him. The passionate discussions about historical events that had once characterized his classes gave way to subdued lectures and worksheet assignments. Dark circles appeared under his eyes. His shirt showed wrinkles that would have been unthinkable a month ago, and he found himself losing his place in the middle of sentences. The whispers started in the teacher's lounge first. Did you hear about Oscar and Melody? I always thought Luke spent too much time at their house. Those poor girls. One Tuesday morning, as Oscar tried to explain the causes of World War I to a class of increasingly restless sophomores, a knock at his classroom door made him jump. Norman Yoder, the school principal, stood in the hallway, his face set in what he probably thought was a sympathetic expression. Mr. Walker, could you step out for a moment? Oscar's students exchanged meaningful glances as he walked to the door. They knew something was wrong. Teenagers always knew. He caught them whispering about his situation more than once, had seen them quickly close social media apps when he walked past. In the hallway, Principal Yoder didn't waste time on pleasantries. Oscar, I've received some concerning feedback about your recent performance. Your last round of student evaluations showed a significant decline. I'm dealing with some personal issues, Oscar said stiffly. It's temporary. Yes, well, Yoder shifted uncomfortably. Several parents have expressed concern about their children's progress in your class, and some of your colleagues have noticed changes in your behavior. Changes? You seem distracted, unprepared. This isn't like you, Oscar. I think it might be wise to schedule a wellness check with our district counselor. Oscar's hands clenched at his sides. I'm fine, Norman. I just need some time to adjust to changes in my personal life. Ah, yes. About that. Yoder glanced around the empty hallway. We try to maintain certain standards of moral conduct among our faculty. The community talks, you understand. Heat rose in Oscar's chest. Moral conduct? My wife and best friend betrayed me, and you're questioning my moral conduct? Now, Yoder raised his hands defensively. No one is judging anyone. But if you need to take some time off, perhaps a leave of absence. I need my job, Oscar said through gritted teeth. My salary barely covers child support and rent as it is. Yoder nodded, though his expression suggested he wasn't really listening. Just think about the counseling, won't you? We need to document that we've taken appropriate steps to address these performance issues. Back in his classroom, Oscar found his students unusually quiet, obviously straining to hear the hallway conversation. He returned to his lecture on World War I. but the words felt hollow in his mouth. How could he explain the complex web of alliances that led to global conflict when he couldn't even understand the betrayal that had destroyed his own home? That evening, driving to his daughter's soccer game, Oscar passed Luke's auto shop. The sight of Jennifer's car in the parking lot made him slam on his brakes. He pulled over, watching as his younger daughter emerged from the shop office, smiling and waving to someone inside. Luke appeared in the doorway, handing Jennifer what looked like an envelope. They talked for a few minutes, Luke's hand resting paternally on Jennifer's shoulder, before she got into her car and drove away. Oscar's phone buzzed, a text from Amy, his older daughter. "Got the job at Uncle Luke's. He's going to teach me about business management. Says I could help run the place someday." The phone slipped from Oscar's numb fingers onto the passenger seat. Luke wasn't content with taking his wife and his home. Now he was trying to buy his daughter's affection too. The thought of his children working for the man who had helped destroy their family made bile rise in his throat. He picked up his phone again, fingers hovering over the keys. What could he say? Don't trust the man who's offering you opportunities one can't afford to give you. Don't be fooled by the uncle who's been in your life since before you could walk. Instead, he typed, "That's great, sweetheart. Be sure to do your homework too." Later that night, in his studio apartment, Oscar sat at his small desk grading papers. The red marks he made on his students' essays blurred before his eyes, looking too much like the ink that had forged his signature on those mortgage documents. His daughter's latest Instagram post showed her at Luke's shop, posing proudly in a new employee t-shirt. The comments were full of heart emojis and congratulations, including one from Melody. "So proud of you, baby. Uncle Luke is the best." Oscar closed his laptop and walked to the window. From the third floor, he could see the city lights spreading out before him, so different from the quiet suburban view he'd had from his home. Somewhere out there, his daughters were sleeping in their childhood beds, while Luke probably sat at his kitchen table, planning more ways to integrate himself into their lives. The weight of it all, the betrayal, the financial strain, the whispers at work, the slow loss of his children's affection, pressed down on him like a physical force. He hadn't felt this alone since his parents died, and even then, he'd had Luke's shoulder to cry on. The community center circle of folding chairs. Oscar shifted uncomfortably, trying to find a position that didn't make the metal chair dig into his back. He hadn't wanted to come to this support group for betrayed spouses, but his sister Dora had insisted, saying he needed to talk to people who understood what he was going through. Would anyone like to share their story today? The group facilitator's voice was gentle, practiced in handling raw emotions. Oscar kept his eyes fixed on the linoleum floor, studying the scuff marks from years of dragged chairs. He didn't want to share, didn't want to admit how completely he'd been fooled, how thoroughly his life had been dismantled. "I'll go," a woman's voice spoke up from across the circle. "I'm Sally Snyder, and my husband of 12 years left me for my sister." Oscar's head lifted slightly. There was something in her voice, not self-pity, but a controlled anger that resonated with his own feelings. "The worst part wasn't even the affair," Sally continued. She sat straight-backed in her chair, her business attire suggesting she'd come directly from work. "It was the way they tried to gaslight me into thinking I was overreacting, that I should be happy for them, that love is love and all that nonsense." Murmurs of understanding rippled through the group. Oscar found himself nodding along. "But I'm a paralegal," Sally said, a hint of steel entering her voice. "I know my rights, and when I found out they'd been planning to buy a house using my credit behind my back, I made sure they faced consequences." Oscar's attention snapped fully to Sally now. The mortgage documents, Melody's forgery, it all came rushing back. After the meeting, he found himself hanging back as others filed out. Sally was gathering her things, sliding papers into a sleek leather briefcase. "Excuse me," Oscar said, approaching her carefully. "That situation you mentioned with the house." Sally looked up, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "First time at group?" "Yeah, I'm Oscar. And my wife. Well, my soon-to-be ex-wife and my former best friend tried something similar with my house. Let me guess, they had it all planned out? Thought they were doing you a favor by making decisions about your life without your consent." The accuracy of her assessment made Oscar blink. They had a PowerPoint presentation about polyamory and everything. Sally's laugh was sharp, but not unkind. Of course they did. These people always think they can intellectualize their way out of being horrible human beings. She paused, studying him. Want to grab a coffee? I might be able to help you understand your legal options. They found a quiet corner in a nearby diner, where Oscar told her everything. The anniversary revelation, the forged documents, Luke's attempts to buy his daughter's loyalty through job offers. Sally took notes as he spoke, her pen moving quickly across a legal pad. The forgery is serious, she said when he finished, especially since she used her position at the bank to do it. That's not just forgery. It's abuse of her professional position. Oscar wrapped his hands around his coffee mug, seeking warmth. I have copies of the documents, but I don't know where to start. First thing tomorrow, you need to report this to her bank's compliance department, Sally said, writing something on her legal pad. They take this kind of thing very seriously. Then we need to look at your house's current mortgage status and any other financial documents she might have had access to. A man at the next table had been glancing their way throughout the conversation. Now he stood up and approached them, his weathered face creased with concern. Sorry to interrupt, he said, but I couldn't help overhearing about the auto shop owner. I'm Vince McKee, by the way. I was at the support group too, sitting in the back. Oscar nodded, remembering seeing him in the circle. I work for the state's Consumer Protection Office, Vince continued, pulling out a business card. And let's just say your friend Luke's auto shop has been on our radar for a while. Sally's eyebrows rose. What do you mean? Vince glanced around the diner before sliding into their booth. We've had complaints about unusual billing practices, unnecessary repairs, overcharging, but nothing concrete enough to act on. The victims are often elderly or don't know enough about cars to challenge his recommendations. Oscar's mind raced back through years of taking his Honda to Luke's shop. All those repairs that seemed to cost more than expected, the frequent recommendations for additional work. He always said he was giving me the friend discount, Oscar said bitterly. I trusted him completely. That's usually how these things work, Vince said grimly. Trust makes it easy to exploit people. Sally was writing rapidly on her legal pad. Vince, if Luke's business isn't legitimate, that could affect his ability to make good on any financial commitments he's made regarding Oscar's house. Not to mention what it might mean for my daughters, Oscar added, thinking of those job offers that had seemed so generous. They both started working for him recently. The three of them sat in the diner until closing time, discussing possibilities and sharing information. For the first time since his anniversary night, Oscar felt something other than despair. It wasn't hope exactly. The wound was still too fresh for that, but perhaps it was the first step toward whatever came after betrayal. As he drove back to his cramped studio apartment that night, Oscar thought about everything he'd learned. The image of his daughters working at Luke's shop took on a darker tone now. What had seemed like generous opportunity might be something more manipulative. The man he'd trusted with his car, his home, his family. Had any of it been real? His phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Uncle Luke says I can start handling customer invoices next week. Isn't that awesome? Oscar's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He thought of elderly customers being overcharged, of forged mortgage documents, of PowerPoint presentations that tried to rationalize betrayal. The weight of protecting his daughters while their world crumbled around them settled heavily on his shoulders. In his apartment, Oscar sat at his small desk and began to write everything down. Every suspicious repair, every overlarge bill, every instance of Luke's generosity that now seemed tainted. The night grew old around him as he worked, and somewhere between one page and the next, his grief began to transform into something else entirely: determination. He would protect his daughters. He would save his home. And maybe, just maybe, he would find a way to expose the truth about the man who had pretended to be his friend for so many years. Not for revenge. Oscar was too tired for revenge, but for justice. For his daughters. For himself. The first light of dawn was creeping through his window when Oscar finally went to bed. For the first time in weeks, his dreams weren't filled with memories of betrayal. Instead, he dreamed of truth coming to light, of justice being served, of his daughters understanding what real integrity looked like. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, in a cramped studio apartment with determination as his only companion, Oscar Walker began to see a path forward through the darkness of betrayal. Amy Walker stood in the doorway of her father's studio apartment, watching him sleep at his small desk, papers scattered around him. She'd used her emergency key to let herself in after he hadn't answered her texts about missing their weekly breakfast. The sight of him, exhausted and surrounded by documents, made her heart ache. The past month had been a whirlwind of confusion and anger. When her mother and Uncle Luke had first explained their new family arrangement, Amy had tried to be understanding. She was 17, practically an adult. Shouldn't she be mature enough to accept modern relationships? Luke had always been part of their lives, and his offer of a job at the shop seemed like a generous way to help her save for college. But something felt wrong. The way her father had been pushed out, the speed with which Luke had moved into their home, the strange tension whenever anyone mentioned finances. Amy picked up one of the papers from her father's desk, a bank document with what was supposedly his signature, but she'd seen enough of her father's grating comments to know his handwriting. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Luke. "Don't forget, management training starts today. Going to teach you everything about running a successful business." Amy's finger hovered over the reply button when she noticed her father's phone on the desk, screen lighting up with a new message. She shouldn't look. She knew she shouldn't. But the preview caught her eye. Sally. Found more evidence of overcharging at the shop. Need to talk. Frowning, Amy pulled out her own phone again, this time opening the text thread between her mother and Luke. She scrolled back, past the recent messages about living arrangements and household schedules, past the discussions about her father's unreasonable reaction, all the way back 3 years. Her hands began to shake as she read. "Luke, we need to be patient. Oscar trusts me completely with the shop's billing. A few more years of building up the business, and we can make our move. Melody, I hate lying to him, but you're right. We need to be financially secure before we tell him anything. Luke, just think about our future together. The house will be perfect once we refinance. Your position at the bank makes everything easier." Amy's vision blurred with tears. 3 years. They'd been planning this for 3 years, manipulating her father's trust, using his friendship and his business. She thought about all the times Luke had insisted on handling her father's car repairs personally, always with a friendly clap on the shoulder and a "don't worry about the bill, buddy." Her phone felt heavy in her hand as she opened her recording app. She'd learned about single-party consent laws in her government class. As long as she was part of the conversation, she could legally record it. Taking a deep breath, she typed a response to Luke. "On my way to training. Can't wait to learn everything about the business." Later that afternoon, in Luke's office, Amy sat with her phone, discreetly recording as he explained his special billing practices. "See, the trick is knowing your customer," Luke said, pulling up a spreadsheet. "Some people, like that Mrs. Henderson who came in yesterday, they don't know anything about cars. So when we tell them they need a new transmission fluid flush every 5,000 miles, but don't most manufacturers recommend every 30,000 miles? Amy asked innocently, remembering her father's old car maintenance book. Luke waved his hand dismissively. "That's just a guideline. We're being thorough, protecting our customers, like you protected Dad all those years." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Luke's expression shifted, something cold flickering behind his friendly smile. "Your dad's my best friend," he said carefully. "Everything I did was for the good of this family." "Which family?" Amy's voice trembled slightly. "The one you broke apart, or the one you're trying to force together?" Luke leaned forward, his tone dropping. "Amy, honey, you're too young to understand adult relationships. Your mother and I love each other. We tried to do this the right way, tried to include your father in our vision by forging his signature, by overcharging him for repairs for years." The color drained from Luke's face. "Who told you about?" "Nobody told me." Amy stood up, her phone still recording. "I figured it out myself, and I'm going to make sure everyone else knows too." She walked out his office, her heart pounding, but her steps steady. In her car, she called her father's number with shaking fingers. Oscar's voice was groggy when he answered. "Amy? What's wrong?" "Dad, I found something. A lot of things, actually. And I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I ever believed them." Across town, in Sally Snyder's office, Oscar listened to his daughter's recordings with growing amazement. Sally's pen moved quickly across her legal pad, noting times and dates, specific admissions of fraudulent practices. "This is exactly what we needed," she said, looking up at Amy with approval. "But are you sure you want to do this? It could make things difficult with your mother." Amy's chin lifted, a gesture so reminiscent of her father that Sally had to hide a smile. Mom and Luke hurt Dad on purpose. They planned it for years. They used his trust and tried to steal his home. The truth needs to come out. Vince McKee arrived 20 minutes later, his face lighting up as he listened to the recordings. "This gives us probable cause for a proper investigation. Combined with the customer complaints we've already documented." As they talked, more pieces fell into place. Former employees of Luke's shop began coming forward, emboldened by the knowledge that an official investigation was underway. They brought stories of systematic overcharging, unnecessary repairs, and pressure to deceive customers. Oscar watched his daughter across the desk, pride mixing with sadness in his chest. She shouldn't have had to learn about adult betrayal this way. Shouldn't have had to become an investigator in her own family's tragedy. But here she was, turning her pain into purpose, her confusion into clarity. "We need to be strategic about this," Sally said, organizing her notes. "The bank fraud with the mortgage documents, the auto shop's practices, the pattern of deception. It all needs to come out in the right order." Amy pulled out her phone again. "I have more recordings. From the house, from the shop. Luke and Mom, they don't even try to hide their conversations anymore. They think everyone's accepted their version of events." Oscar reached across the desk and squeezed his daughter's hand. For the first time since that devastating anniversary night, he felt something like hope. Not for reconciliation, that bridge had burned beyond repair, but for justice, for truth, for his daughter's faith in right and wrong. The morning edition of the local newspaper landed on doorsteps across town with an audible thud. The headline blazed across the front page: "Trusted local business under investigation. Auto shop owner accused of systematic fraud." Christy Graham's byline led into a meticulously researched article, complete with customer testimonials, financial records, and expert analysis. The veteran reporter had spent weeks verifying every detail, knowing the story would shake their community to its core. In Luke's kitchen, formerly Oscar's kitchen, Melody's coffee cup clattered against its saucer as she read the article aloud. Sources close to the investigation reveal a pattern of fraudulent practices at Graves Auto Repair, including unnecessary services, inflated bills, and targeted exploitation of vulnerable customers. Owner Luke Graves is also implicated in a mortgage fraud scheme involving forged documents and misuse of banking protocols. "They can't prove anything," Luke interrupted, pacing the kitchen floor. But his face had gone pale, and his hands wouldn't stop shaking. "It's all circumstantial. No one will believe." The doorbell's chime cut him off. Through the window, they could see a news van parking across the street. Meanwhile, at First Regional Bank, Melody's supervisor, Johanna McFarland, sat grim-faced behind her desk, the morning paper spread out beside an open personnel file. "This is very serious, Melody," Johanna said, her tone professionally neutral despite the disappointment in her eyes. "Using your position here to facilitate mortgage fraud. I don't have any choice in this matter." "It wasn't fraud," Melody protested weakly. "We were going to make the payments. We just needed to speed up the process. By forging your husband's signature? By circumventing bank protocols?" Johanna shook her head. "The compliance department is launching a full investigation. Until that's complete, I have to terminate your employment, effective immediately." Across town, Oscar sat in his classroom, teaching about the Civil War while his phone buzzed continuously in his desk drawer. His students whispered among themselves, sneaking glances at their own phones despite the usual ban on devices during class. "Mr. Walker," one brave soul finally raised his hand. "Is it true? About your wife and Mr. Graves?" Oscar looked at his students' faces, some concerned, some curious, all waiting to see how their teacher would handle this public exposure of his private pain. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "the most important lessons in life aren't found in history books. They're about integrity, about standing up for what's right even when it's difficult." The classroom fell silent. absorbing his words. In the back row, Amy sat with her head held high, her father's quiet dignity reflecting in her own bearing. The story exploded across social media. Former customers of Graves Auto Repair began sharing their experiences. He charged my elderly mother $800 for a repair she didn't need. Always said my car needed expensive work, but when I took it elsewhere, they found nothing wrong. Can't believe we trusted him for so long. Luke's business insurance company called next, their tone clipped and professional as they explained the termination of his coverage due to fraudulent practices. Without insurance, he couldn't legally operate the repair shop. The bank's investigation into Melody's actions moved swiftly. Years of working as a teller had made her overconfident, leaving a clear trail of irregularities in her handling of the mortgage documents. Each revelation brought new consequences, new layers of deception exposed to public view. Former employees came forward, their stories adding detail and depth to the investigation. They spoke of pressure to perform unnecessary repairs, of being taught to target certain customers for extra services, of the gnawing guilt that had finally driven them to speak up. Mr. Graves always said we were just being thorough, one former mechanic told investigators. But we knew what we were doing wasn't right. When we saw the newspaper article, it gave us the courage to come forward. The community's reaction surprised Oscar. Instead of the whispers and judgment he'd feared, he found support. Parents of his students sent emails of encouragement. Colleagues who had once avoided eye contact now stopped to express their admiration for how he'd handled the situation. "You taught us all something about grace under pressure," Norman Yoder told him, the principal's earlier concerns about moral conduct forgotten in light of the truth. But the hardest moments came at home. Jennifer, his younger daughter, struggled to reconcile the Uncle Luke she'd known with the man revealed in the investigation. "He taught me to change a tire," she said one evening, sitting in Oscar's small apartment. "He helped build my treehouse. How could he be lying the whole time?" "Sometimes people we trust can fool us," Oscar replied gently. "It doesn't mean we were wrong to trust. It means they were wrong to abuse that trust." Amy, who had initially struggled with her role in exposing the truth, found her voice growing stronger. She began speaking up in her government class about ethics and justice, her personal experience lending weight to her words. The newspaper articles continued, each one revealing new aspects of the deception. Christy Graham's reporting was thorough and unflinching, but never sensational. She focused on the facts, the pattern of fraud at the auto shop, the mortgage scheme, the calculated betrayal of trust. The county courthouse stood solid and imposing against the autumn sky as Oscar walked up its stone steps, Sally Snyder beside him, John Strickland, his divorce attorney, a few paces ahead. Inside, the polished floors echoed with their footsteps as they made their way to courtroom 3. The divorce proceedings had taken on new urgency in light of the criminal investigations into both Melody and Luke. John had built a strong case, using the evidence of forgery and fraud to argue for Oscar's right to the house and primary custody of the girls. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Weatherby entered the courtroom. Oscar's eyes met Melody's briefly across the room. She sat with her own attorney, her usually impeccable appearance showing signs of strain. The loss of her banking job and the pending criminal charges had taken their toll. The evidence mounted steadily throughout the hearing. Amy's recordings played in the hushed courtroom, Luke's voice casual and unguarded as he discussed exploiting Oscar's trust. Financial records showed years of systematic overcharging at the auto shop. The forged mortgage documents displayed Melody's clear attempt to steal Oscar's home through fraud. "Your Honor," John Strickland argued, his voice steady and confident, "we have demonstrated a clear pattern of deception and financial malfeasance." Mr. Walker's wife and her paramour didn't simply engage in infidelity. They orchestrated a years-long campaign to exploit his trust and ultimately attempt to defraud him of his home. The judge's questions were pointed and precise. She paid particular attention to Amy's recordings, noting that they had been legally obtained in their single consent state. "The evidence of premeditation is particularly troubling," Judge Weatherby noted, reviewing the text messages Amy had discovered. This was not a case of a relationship that developed naturally and led to poor choices. This was a calculated plan to deceive and defraud. When the ruling came, it was decisive. Oscar would retain the house and primary custody of both daughters. Melody's attempts to claim half the property value were dismissed in light of her fraudulent actions with the mortgage documents. Outside the courthouse, Oscar hugged his daughters close. Amy's strength throughout the proceedings had amazed him. Her clear testimony about discovering the deception, her carefully documented evidence, her unwavering commitment to the truth. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. "Both of you. I know how hard this has been." Jennifer wiped tears from her eyes. "I still can't believe, Uncle Luke, that it was all a lie." "Not all of it," Oscar said gently. "The love in our family, between us, that was real, still is real." Sally touched his arm gently. "The criminal proceedings will take longer, but this was a big step. You got your home back, your daughters, your life." The implications of the divorce ruling rippled outward. Luke's auto repair shop, already struggling under the weight of the fraud investigation and loss of insurance, faced multiple lawsuits from former customers. The state's Consumer Protection Office, led by Vince McKee, built a strong case against his business practices. The bank's investigation into Melody's actions reached its conclusion, leading to formal charges of mortgage fraud and professional misconduct. Her banking career was effectively over, her reputation in the industry destroyed by her own actions. That evening, Oscar stood in his old backyard. His backyard again, legally and rightfully. The treehouse Luke had helped build still stood in the old oak tree, a reminder that even tainted memories had once held joy. Amy and Jennifer sat at the patio table, homework spread out between them. They'd chosen to stay with him, understanding now the full scope of their mother's deception. It wasn't just about the affair, it was about integrity, about choices, about the kind of people they wanted to be. Sally joined them for dinner, her presence bringing a warmth that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with friendship, support, and shared understanding. They had all learned hard lessons about trust and betrayal, but also about resilience and truth. As Oscar looked around at his reconstituted family, he realized that sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about restoration. Not to what was before, but to what could be now, after the truth has done its necessary work. Epilogue, 5 years later. The autumn breeze rustled through the oak leaves in Oscar Walker's backyard, carrying with it the scent of Sally's famous apple pie, cooling on the kitchen windowsill. The old treehouse, now restored and repainted, where Oscar sat grading papers while his students' parents gathered for the annual back-to-school barbecue. 5 years had carved new lines around his eyes, but they were laugh lines now, not the deep furrows of betrayal that had marked his face during that devastating period half a decade ago. His silver-streaked hair caught the sunlight as he looked up to watch Amy, home from her second year of law school, deep in conversation with Vince McKee about her summer internship at the state's Consumer Protection Office. "Dad," Jennifer called from the patio, where she was setting up her laptop. "The virtual tour of my first photography exhibition is about to start. Come see." Oscar smiled, remembering how his younger daughter had discovered her passion for photography during the darkest days of their family's upheaval. She'd started by documenting evidence of Luke's auto shop fraud, but the camera had become her way of finding beauty in broken things, of telling stories that needed to be told. The local arts magazine had recently featured her photo series titled Betrayal and Redemption, stark black and white images that told their family's story through metaphor and shadow. The exhibition was her first solo show, hosted by a prestigious gallery in the city where she now attended college. Sally emerged from the house, carrying fresh drinks for their guests, her engagement ring catching the light. They'd taken their time building their relationship, both wounded by past betrayals, both understanding the value of trust earned slowly and kept carefully. Their wedding was planned for spring, a small ceremony in this very backyard where their story had truly begun. "Oscar," Norman Yoder called from near the grill, "the superintendent was just telling me about your nomination for Teacher of the Year. The way you've helped students deal with their own family challenges. It's remarkable." The support group Oscar had started for students dealing with difficult family situations had grown into a district-wide program. His own experience had taught him that sometimes the most important lessons weren't found in textbooks, and his classroom had become a place where history and humanity intertwined. Dora, who had recently completed her PhD in psychology, often collaborated with him on the program. Her dissertation on trust, betrayal, and recovery in family systems had been inspired by watching her brother's journey from devastation to renewal. News of Melody and Luke's current circumstances arrived sporadically through the small-town grapevine. After the criminal charges for fraud and forgery, they'd moved to Arizona, their dreams of a polyamorous paradise shattered by consequences. Luke's attempt to open another auto shop there had failed when background checks revealed his history. He now worked as a low-level employee at a corporate chain garage, his entrepreneurial ambitions buried under the weight of his past actions. Melody had faced her own struggles. The forgery conviction had made it impossible to work in banking or finance. Last anyone heard, she was working as a retail clerk, her carefully maintained image of suburban success replaced by the harsh reality of starting over in middle age with a criminal record. Their hasty marriage, performed at a Las Vegas chapel shortly after leaving town, had already ended in divorce. The stress of financial difficulties, mutual blame, and the constant shadow of their past actions had proven too much for their relationship to bear. As Amy had observed during one of her rare conversations with her mother, a foundation built on lies will always crack under pressure. The auto shop that had been the center of so much deception had found redemption under new ownership. Luke's former manager, Mike Chun, had bought it at auction and transformed it into one of the most trusted repair businesses in the region. His strict ethical policies and transparent pricing were direct responses to the previous owner's fraud, and he'd even hired Jennifer to design the shop's new marketing materials, an act of poetic justice that hadn't been lost on anyone. The civil suits from Luke's former customers had finally been settled, though the repayment plan would follow him for decades. Some of the elderly victims had passed away before seeing justice, but their families had made sure their stories were heard. The local newspaper had run a follow-up series by Christy Graham, documenting how the community had healed and learned from the scandal. Oscar's phone buzzed, a text from his divorce attorney, John Strickland, who had become a friend over the years. Just handled another case inspired by yours. Client found strength in your story. Grabbing lunch next week? These messages didn't hurt anymore. The silver bracelet that had once symbolized 15 years of lies had been sold. The money split between his daughter's college funds. Amy's law school tuition and Jennifer's photography equipment were fitting uses for funds that had once represented such pain. The sound of laughter drew Oscar's attention back to his backyard. Amy was showing Sally her new engagement ring. She and her longtime boyfriend, a fellow law student she'd met during a consumer protection seminar, had just announced their own plans to marry. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that Amy had found her calling and her future husband through the very case that had nearly destroyed her family. Vince McKee, now the head of the state's Consumer Protection Office, raised his glass in a toast. The investigation that had brought justice to Oscar's family had led to broader reforms in auto repair industry oversight. Amy's summer internship at his office had turned into a mission. She was determined to build a career protecting others from the kind of exploitation her father had suffered. The treehouse. Oscar remembered the day he and Luke had built it, how he'd trusted his friend with the safety of his children. That trust had been betrayed, but the treehouse itself had been reclaimed. Jennifer had repainted it last summer, covering the old wood with bright colors and positive messages. Like the house itself, like their family, it had been transformed rather than destroyed. Sally's hand slipped into his as they watched their blended family move through the garden. Her own history of betrayal had given her the wisdom to help heal his wounds, and together they'd learned that second chances were possible when built on honesty and mutual respect. The biggest surprise of the past 5 years had been the way the community had rallied around them. The whispers that had once hurt so much had turned to expressions of support. Oscar's dignity in the face of betrayal, his focus on protecting his daughters rather than seeking revenge, had earned him a respect that went beyond sympathy. His classroom had become a place where students felt safe discussing difficult topics. The history lessons often sparked deeper discussions about ethics, choices, and consequences. Oscar had found that his personal experience added weight to these conversations, though he never shared the specific details of his story. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Jennifer's virtual exhibition tour had ended to enthusiastic reviews from the gathered guests. Amy was explaining the finer points of consumer protection law to an attentive audience. Sally was directing the cleanup with the efficiency of someone who had found her place in this reconstructed family. Oscar looked around at the life he'd rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. The house that Melody and Luke had tried to steal through fraud had become a true home again, filled with new memories and new love. His daughters had grown not just older but stronger, their character forged in the crucible of their family's crisis. The anniversary bracelet was long gone, but its proceeds had helped Amy buy her law school textbooks and Jennifer purchase her first professional camera. From the seeds of betrayal, something new and beautiful had grown. Oscar thought about the lesson he often shared with his students now, that the true measure of a person isn't in the betrayals they suffer, but in how they choose to rebuild. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Oscar found himself alone for a moment in the kitchen. The room where he'd discovered the forged mortgage documents and confronted Melody and Luke's PowerPoint presentation about polyamory now held different memories. Sally teaching him to make her grandmother's lasagna, Amy practicing her law school presentations, Jennifer editing her photos at the table. He picked up a framed photo from the counter, one of Jennifer's early works. It showed the old treehouse at sunrise. The image had won her first photography award and now served as the cover of her exhibition catalog. The house fell quiet as the last guest departed. Amy and Jennifer were staying the night, just like they had so often during the worst of times. But now their presence wasn't about seeking shelter from a storm. It was about choosing to be together, about celebrating the family they'd become rather than mourning the one they'd lost. Sally joined him at the kitchen window, where they could see the treehouse silhouetted against the rising moon. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked softly. Oscar smiled, drawing her close. "Just thinking about how sometimes the worst betrayals can lead us to our best selves." He paused, looking out at the yard where so much of their story had unfolded, and how the right kind of love doesn't need PowerPoint presentations to prove its worth. The oak tree's leaves rustled in the evening breeze, its branches still strong, still sheltering the treehouse that had survived betrayal and renewal. Like the family it watched over, it had weathered the storm and grown stronger, its roots reaching deeper, its branches stretching toward whatever tomorrow might bring. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.